Because sometimes the people who look the strongest are the ones hiding the deepest pain. Red Heart. John was 67 years old. For 45 years, he woke up at the same time. 6 a.m. Same coffee. Same road. Same office. Everyone at work knew him. Good morning, John. John, we need your help. John, you always know what to do. For decades, his name filled the halls. He was respected. He was needed. He was important. On his retirement day, his co-workers surprised him. There was cake. There were gifts. There were speeches. His manager said, John, you didn't just work here. You became part of this family. Everyone clapped. John smiled. But inside, he wondered, will anyone remember me tomorrow? The next morning, John woke up early. He put on his suit. He walked to the closet. Then he stopped. He slowly removed the suit. Today, nobody needed him. His wife saw him sitting silently. She asked, John, why don't you go enjoy your retirement? He looked at her and said, I spent 45 years trying to create a good life. But now I don't know what to do with the life I created. Weeks passed. The house became quieter. His children called less because they had their own families. His old co-workers moved on. The office replaced him. A younger man sat at his desk, used his computer, answered his phone. Life continued. One day, John found an old lunch box in the garage. Inside was a small note. It was from his daughter when she was young. It said, Daddy, thank you for working so hard. I love you. John sat on the floor. His hands started shaking. He remembered something. He was always working for his family. But he missed many moments with them. That night, he called his daughter. Dad? Is everything okay? John stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, I just wanted to say, I love you. His daughter became silent. Because she knew. Her father never said those words often. Not because he didn't feel them. Because he was always busy. The next morning, John did something different. He went outside. He walked around the neighborhood. He saw an old man sitting alone on a bench. The man said, Retired? John smiled. Yes. The old man laughed. Funny, isn't it? When we work, we dream about free time. When we get free time, we miss feeling needed. John started visiting the bench every day. Soon, more retired people joined. They shared stories. They laughed. They helped each other. John realized something. Maybe he didn't lose his purpose. Maybe he just needed a new one. A few months later, John started helping young workers. He taught them everything he learned. One young man asked, Why are you doing this? John smiled. Because knowledge should not retire with a person. Years later, John's grandson asked, Grandpa, what was your best job? John thought for a moment. Then he answered, My first job gave me success. My second job gave me peace. The boy asked, What was your second job? John smiled. Learning how to live. When John passed away, hundreds of people came. Not because he was famous. Not because he was rich. They came because he made them feel important. At the end of his life, John understood. A person is not forgotten when they retire. They are forgotten when they stop sharing their heart. Because sometimes the saddest moments in life are not when we lose something. They are when we finally realize what we had. Red Heart. Robert was 70 years old. For almost half of his life, he wore the same blue uniform. Every morning, before the sun came up, Robert left his small house. He carried his lunchbox. He carried his old watch. And he carried a dream. A dream that one day, after years of hard work, he would finally have time to enjoy life. Robert worked for a small company for 45 years. Everyone knew him. The young employees called him Mr. Robert. When machines stopped working, they called Robert. When someone had a problem, they called Robert. When someone needed advice, they called Robert. He was not the owner. He was not the richest man. But he was the man everyone trusted. On his last day, the entire office surprised him. There were balloons. There was cake. There was a small gift on his desk. His manager stood in front of everyone. He said, Robert, this company will never find another person like you. Everyone clapped. Some people cried. Robert looked around the room. He saw faces of people he helped. People he trained. People who became successful. He smiled. He thought, I finally did it. When he walked out of the building for the last time, he looked back. The lights were still on. People were still working. The world continued. But something inside him felt strange. He whispered, Goodbye. The first week of retirement felt wonderful. Robert slept longer. He watched television. He enjoyed his coffee. He told himself, This is freedom. But then something changed. The mornings became too quiet. His alarm stopped ringing. His phone stopped buzzing. Nobody asked for his help. Nobody needed his experience. Nobody called his name. Every morning, Robert sat near the window. He watched people leave for work. Young men with coffee. Parents taking children to school. Workers rushing through the streets. And he remembered his old life. A life full of noise. A life full of people. A life where he mattered. His wife, Linda, noticed. She sat beside him. She said, "Robert, you spent your whole life taking care of everyone. Now take care of yourself." Robert looked at her. Then he said something that broke her heart. "I know how to work, but I don't know how to stop." Months passed. His friends from work promised, "We will visit." But everyone became busy. They had families. They had responsibilities. They had their own lives. Nobody was cruel. Life was just moving. One afternoon, Robert opened an old drawer. Inside was a small notebook. He forgot about it. On the cover, he wrote years ago, "Things I will do after retirement." He opened it. The first page said, "Travel with Linda. Learn painting. Spend more time with my children. Teach young people. Watch sunsets. Enjoy simple days." Robert stared at the list. His eyes became wet. Because he realized. He spent 45 years preparing for retirement. But he never prepared for life after it. That night, he went into the bedroom. He found an old photo. It was him and Linda when they were young. They were standing near a lake. They were smiling. They had dreams. They had plans. Robert touched the picture. He whispered, "Where did those years go?" The next morning, Robert woke up early. But this time, he did not sit by the window. He put on his jacket. He went outside. He walked to a nearby community center. A group of young people were learning skills. Robert stood there quietly. A young man asked, "Sir, can I help you?" Robert smiled. "No, I came here to help." The first day, only one person listened to him. A young boy named Daniel. Daniel asked, "Why are you teaching us?" Robert answered, "Because someone taught me once, and now it's my turn." Every week, Robert returned. More people came. They listened. They learned. They respected him. One day, Daniel asked, "Mr. Robert, are you happier now?" Robert smiled. "Yes." Daniel asked, "Because you have something to do?" Robert shook his head. "No, because I finally understand. Purpose does not disappear when a job ends." Years passed. Robert became known in the community. Not as a worker. Not as an employee. But as someone who changed lives. On his 80th birthday, his house was full. Young people came. Families came. Old friends came. Daniel, now a successful man, stood up. He said, "Robert gave me the first advice that changed my life." Everyone looked at Robert. Daniel continued, "He told me, your future is built by what you do today." Robert looked around the room. The same man who once thought nobody needed him was surrounded by people whose lives he touched. That evening, Robert sat outside. He watched the sunset. Linda sat beside him. She asked, "Do you regret retiring?" Robert smiled. "No, I regret thinking my value was only in my work." The next morning, Robert's chair near the window was empty. But his story continued. Because every person he helped carried a piece of him. People think retirement means the end. The end of work. The end of importance. The end of purpose. But Robert discovered something. A job gives you a title. But kindness gives you a legacy. The saddest thing is not growing old. The saddest thing is forgetting that your life still has meaning. Before we start this story, subscribe and stay with us. Because this story may remind you of someone you love. Red Heart. At 65 years old, David retired. On his last day at work, everyone stood up and clapped. His manager said, "David, this company will never forget you." His coworkers hugged him. Everyone told him, "Enjoy your retirement." David smiled proudly. He walked out of the building holding a small gift box. For 38 years, that office was his second home. He thought, "Now I finally have time for myself." But he didn't know. The hardest chapter of his life was about to begin. The first morning after retirement, David woke up at 6 a.m. He wore his old shirt. He made coffee. Then he remembered. There was nowhere to go. No meetings. No calls. No one waiting for him. He sat alone at the kitchen table. The chair felt colder than before. His wife asked, "Why are you so quiet?" David replied. "I spent my whole life trying to become someone important. Now I feel invisible." Days became weeks. His phone stopped ringing. The people who once needed his advice were busy with their own lives. One day, David opened his old work bag. Inside was a notebook. On the first page, he had written, "My dreams after retirement." He slowly turned the pages. "Travel with my wife. Spend time with my children. Learn something new. Help others." He stared at the list. Then he whispered, "I forgot to live while I was preparing to live." The next morning, something changed. David put on his shoes. He went outside. He started visiting an old community center. He taught young people everything he learned from his career. The first day, only one student came. The next week, 5 came. After a few months, the room was full. A young man asked him, "Sir, why do you still help us when you're retired?" David smiled. "Because retirement ended my job, not my purpose." Years later, people didn't remember David because of his position. They remembered him because he changed lives. On his final birthday, his family asked, "Dad, what was your greatest achievement?" David looked at his old work watch. Then he looked at his family. He said, "Not the years I spent working. The moments I spent loving." Sometimes retirement takes away your job, but it gives you a chance to finally find yourself. Because sometimes one small moment can reveal a lifetime of hidden pain. Red Heart. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., an old man named Henry walked to the same bench in the park. He carried a small brown envelope. He sat alone. He watched people walk by. Children laughing. Families together. Young people chasing their dreams. But Henry always sat quietly, holding that same envelope. People in the neighborhood knew him. Some called him the man with the letter. But nobody knew why. Nobody knew what was inside. Henry was 72 years old. Before retirement, he was a train engineer. For 40 years, he drove trains across the country. He knew every station, every road, every sunrise, every town. People trusted him with their journeys. Thousands of people reached their families safely because of him. When Henry retired, everyone celebrated. His co-workers gave him a big farewell. His boss said, "Henry, you carried thousands of people home. Now it's time for you to enjoy your own home." Henry smiled, but he didn't say what was in his heart, because his home was not the same anymore. After retirement, Henry returned to an empty house. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier. His children lived far away. They called him, but life was busy. Work, family, responsibilities. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. One evening, Henry cooked dinner for 2. Then he remembered there was only 1 plate needed. He quietly put the second plate away. That night, he looked at an old picture. It was him and his wife when they were young. She was smiling. She always said, "Henry, promise me one thing." "What?" "When you retire, don't spend your days just remembering the past. Go live." Henry smiled sadly, because after she left, the past was the only place he felt close to her. The next morning, he found the old envelope. It was a letter his wife wrote before she died. She told him, "Open this when you feel alone." For 2 years, Henry kept it closed, because he was afraid that after reading it, there would be nothing left. Finally, sitting on that park bench, he opened the letter. Inside were only a few words. "My dear Henry, if you are reading this, you are probably sitting alone somewhere. I know you. You always took care of everyone, but you forgot to take care of yourself. You think your best days are behind you. But I need you to understand something. Your life was never only your job. You are not valuable because you drove trains. You are valuable because of the love you gave. Please don't spend your remaining years waiting for the past. Go find new reasons to smile. I love you. Henry held the letter. His hands were shaking. For the first time in years. He cried. Not because he was broken. Because someone still believed in him. The next day, Henry did something different. He walked to a small school near the park. He asked, "Do children still learn about trains?" The teacher smiled. "Yes," Henry said. "Can I tell them some stories?" The children gathered around him. Henry talked about his journeys, the places he saw, the people he helped, the lessons he learned. The children listened with excitement. A little girl asked, "Mr. Henry, were you lonely before you came here?" Henry became quiet. Then he answered, "Yes." The girl asked, "What changed?" Henry smiled. "I stopped waiting for someone to visit my life and started visiting the lives of others." After that day, Henry became part of the school. Every week he came. He taught. He listened. He laughed. Years later, those children grew up. Some became engineers. Some became teachers. Some became parents. But they never forgot the old man with the letter. One day, a young woman came to see Henry. She said, "Do you remember me?" Henry smiled. "No, I'm sorry." She laughed. "I was the little girl who asked why you were lonely." Henry's eyes filled with happiness. She continued, "You changed my life." Henry looked surprised. "I did?" She nodded. "You taught me something." "What?" "That age doesn't end your story. It just changes the chapter." That evening, Henry returned to his favorite bench. He held the old letter. But this time, he was not alone. Children were playing. People were walking. Life was everywhere. Henry looked at the sunset and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the past, but to the life he almost missed. A few years later, Henry passed away peacefully. In his home, his family found the old letter. Beside it was a note. "Don't remember me because I was old. Remember me because I kept living." Retirement is not the end of your journey. Sometimes it is the beginning of the most important part of your story. Red Heart, subscribe for more powerful stories. This is a new original story concept for your channel. Because sometimes the person who smiles the most is carrying the heaviest memories. Red Heart. Every evening at exactly 5:30 p.m., an old man named William sat outside a small coffee shop. Same chair, same table, same cup of coffee. But one thing was different. He never smiled. The people around him noticed. The young workers, the shop owner, the customers. Everyone wondered, why does that old man come here every day if he is always alone? Nobody knew his story. William was 68 years old. For 42 years, he worked as a firefighter. He ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. He saved strangers. He carried people out of burning buildings. He was called a hero. On his retirement day, the whole fire station gathered. His friends gave him a special jacket. His captain said, "William, you spent your life protecting others. Now protect your own happiness." William smiled. But inside, he felt something he couldn't explain. The next morning, William woke up. No emergency calls. No uniform. No team waiting. No mission. Just silence. For years, his identity was simple. A firefighter. A protector. A man people needed. Now he looked in the mirror and asked, "Who am I without my uniform?" His wife had passed away years earlier. His son lived in another state. They talked sometimes, but not enough. Everyone had their own busy lives. One night, William opened an old box. Inside were hundreds of small memories. A child's drawing. An old family photo. A thank you letter. A newspaper clipping. The headline said, "Firefighter William saves family." He remembered that day. A little girl was trapped inside a house. William carried her out. The girl was crying. She asked, "Will I see my family again?" William told her, "Yes, you will." That little girl survived. But William never saw her again. Until one day, many years later, A young woman entered the coffee shop. She looked around. Then she walked toward William. She asked, "Excuse me, are you William?" He looked surprised. "Yes." Her eyes filled with tears. She said, "You saved my life." William froze. He didn't recognize her. She smiled. "I was that little girl." For a moment, William couldn't speak. The woman sat down. She said, "I searched for you for years." "Why?" William asked. She replied, "Because I wanted to tell you something. You saved me that day, but you also gave me courage to live." William looked down. He whispered, "I was just doing my job." The woman shook her head. "No, you were doing more than a job. You showed me that someone cared." That night, William went home differently. For the first time in years. He smiled. The next day, he went back to the coffee shop. But something changed. A young man was sitting alone. Looking sad, William asked, "Are you okay?" The young man said, "I lost my job. I feel like I'm nothing now." William understood those words. Because he once felt the same. He said, "I lost my uniform and thought I lost myself. But I learned something." The young man asked, "What?" William smiled. "Your value is not what you do. It is what you give." After that day, William started talking to people. He helped young firefighters. He visited schools. He shared his stories. He became a mentor. Years later, a wall in the fire station had a new picture. Not of William saving someone, but of William teaching others. Under the picture were words, "Heroes never retire." Before William passed away, his son came to visit. He held his father's hand. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't there more." William smiled. "I spent my life saving moments for others. I forgot to save moments with you." His son cried, but William held his hand. "No tears. I have a full heart." The next evening, the chair outside the coffee shop was empty. But everyone remembered the old firefighter. Not because of his uniform. Not because of his awards. Because he gave people hope. A job can end. A title can disappear. But a good heart never retires. Because sometimes the loudest pain is the silence after everyone leaves. Red Heart. Every night at exactly 8 p.m., an old man named Thomas placed his phone on the table. He cleaned his glasses. He made a cup of tea. And he waited. Not for a message. Not for the news. Only for one phone call. A call from someone he loved. Thomas was 71 years old. For 50 years, he worked as a carpenter. His hands were old. His back was tired. But his heart was still strong. He built houses. He built furniture. He built a life. People in his town knew him. They said, "Thomas can fix anything." A broken chair? Call Thomas. A broken door? Call Thomas. A broken heart? Sometimes. Thomas had advice for that too. But after retirement, everything changed. The workshop became quiet. The tools stopped making noise. The customers stopped coming. The old wooden smell disappeared. And Thomas realized something painful. A place can feel empty, even when it is still standing. On his last day of work, his neighbors came. They brought flowers. They brought gifts. His friend said, "Thomas, now you can finally relax." Thomas smiled. He said, "Yes." But inside, he wondered, relax and do what? The first few weeks were okay. He cleaned the house. He repaired old things. He watched television. But slowly, the days became longer. The nights became quieter. Every evening, he looked at his phone. Waiting. Waiting for his daughter. Waiting for his son. Waiting for someone to say, "Dad, how are you?" His daughter lived in another city. She had children. She had work. She had responsibilities. She always said, "Dad, I'll call you soon." And Thomas always replied, "Take your time." Because fathers often hide their loneliness. One night, Thomas made dinner. He cooked his favorite meal. He put 2 plates on the table. Then he stopped. He looked at the second plate and slowly removed it. Only one person was coming home. Himself. That night, he found an old family album. The first picture was from when his children were young. His daughter was holding his hand. His son was sitting on his shoulders. His wife was laughing. Everyone was happy. Thomas touched the picture. He whispered, "I worked so hard to give them a good life. But I didn't notice how fast they were growing." He remembered all those years. The school events he missed. The birthdays he came home late. The vacations he canceled. He always said, "One day, I will have more time." But time does not wait. Children grow. Parents age. Life moves quietly. The next morning, Thomas did something unexpected. He opened his old workshop. The same place he worked for decades. Dust covered everything. The tools were silent. He cleaned it. He repaired it. And he opened the door. A young boy walking by stopped. He asked, "Sir, do you make things here?" Thomas smiled. "I used to." The boy asked, "Can you teach me?" Thomas looked surprised. Why? The boy said. My grandfather taught me things before he passed away. I miss learning from him. Thomas felt something in his heart. A feeling he forgot. A feeling of being needed. The next day, the boy came again. Then another child came. Then another. Soon, Thomas's old workshop became full of young voices. Hammer sounds returned. Laughter returned. Life returned. One child asked, Mr. Thomas, why do you still work when you are retired? Thomas smiled. I'm not working. I'm sharing. Months passed. The children learned from him. How to build. How to repair. How to be patient. How to respect others. One afternoon, Thomas received a phone call. It was his daughter. Dad. Thomas smiled. Yes, she said. I heard you are teaching children. Thomas laughed. Yes. There was silence. Then his daughter said, I'm proud of you. Those words were simple. But for Thomas, they meant everything. A few weeks later, his daughter visited. She saw the workshop. She saw the children. She saw her father smiling. She became emotional. She said, Dad, I never knew you felt so alone. Thomas looked at her. He didn't blame her. He only said, I never told you. She cried. I should have called more. Thomas held her hand. Life gets busy, but don't let it become so busy that you forget the people who love you. From that day, things changed. His daughter called every week. His son visited more. His grandchildren learned from him. The house became alive again. Years later, Thomas became old. His hands were weaker. He could not build furniture anymore. But every child he taught remembered him. One day, a former student came back. Now he was a grown man. He said, Mr. Thomas, I became a carpenter because of you. Another person said, You taught me patience. Another said, You gave me confidence. Thomas looked around. The old man who once waited for one phone call now had many people waiting to see him. Before he passed away, his family sat beside him. His daughter held his hand. She asked, Dad, are you afraid? Thomas smiled. No, because I spent many years building houses. But the best thing I built was the love between people. The next morning, Thomas's workshop was quiet, but his lessons stayed alive. Remember, retirement does not remove your value. Age does not end your story. Because sometimes the things we hide for years are the same things that can heal our hearts. Red Heart. Emma was 34 years old when she returned to her childhood home. The house was old. The paint was fading. The garden was empty. But every corner carried memories. She came back after her father passed away. The man who raised her alone. The man she misunderstood for years. After the funeral, Emma started cleaning the house. She opened drawers. She packed old clothes. She looked through old photographs. Then she found something strange. A small, dusty suitcase, hidden under her father's bed. She had never seen it before. It was locked. Inside the suitcase was a small note. It said, For Emma. Open this when you are ready to know the truth. Emma froze. The truth? What truth? Her father was always quiet. He never talked about the past. Whenever she asked about her mother, he changed the subject. Emma found an old key inside the drawer. Her hands were shaking. She opened the suitcase. Inside were hundreds of letters, all with one name written on them. Sarah! Her mother. Emma sat on the floor. Her heart started beating faster. She thought, Why did Dad hide these? She opened the first letter. It was from her father. The date was 30 years ago. It said, Dear Sarah, today Emma took her first steps. She fell 3 times, but she laughed every time. I wish you were here to see it. Emma stopped reading. Her eyes filled with tears. Her father wrote to her mother. For 30 years? She opened another letter. Emma asked why other children have mothers and she doesn't. I told her you were watching over her. I didn't want her to hate you. Emma covered her mouth. All these years, she thought her father never cared about her mother. She kept reading. Letter after letter. Year after year. Her father wrote everything. Her first school day. Her first achievement. Her first heartbreak. Every moment. Then she found the last letter. Written 1 week before her father died. Sarah, I don't know if I have much time left. Emma is grown now. She thinks I was cold. She thinks I never missed you. But I did. Every single day. I just chose to stay strong for our daughter. Someone had to. Emma started crying. She remembered all the time she blamed him. All the time she said, You don't understand me. You never cared. But her father was quietly carrying a pain she never saw. The next morning, Emma visited her father's old friend. She asked, "Why did Dad never tell me about these letters?" The friend smiled sadly. "Because your father didn't want you to carry his sadness. He wanted you to carry his love." Emma looked down. She finally understood. Some people don't show love with words. Some people show love by staying. Years later, Emma kept the suitcase. Not as a reminder of a secret, but as a reminder of her father. Whenever life became difficult, she remembered him, the man who lost everything, but still chose kindness. The final lesson. Sometimes we judge people by what they don't say, but we never see the battles they fight silently. Before you think someone doesn't love you, look at the sacrifices they made. Red Heart, subscribe for more emotional stories. More categories I can make. Poor boy becomes successful. Old couple love story. Betrayal and forgiveness. Mystery emotional story. Animal rescue emotional story. He owned companies. He had luxury cars. He lived in a huge mansion. People everywhere knew his name. But there was one thing nobody knew. Alexander was lonely. Every morning, he woke up in a house so big that his footsteps echoed. He had expensive furniture, beautiful paintings, a private swimming pool, but no one to share it with. His employees respected him, but they were afraid of him. Nobody talked honestly. Nobody laughed with him. Everyone only said, "Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Alexander. Yes, you were right." Alexander believed one thing. Money can solve every problem. One day, his assistant told him, "Sir, your daughter called." Alexander looked at his phone. He saw the missed calls. 3 calls. Then 10. He ignored them. He said, "I'm busy." His assistant quietly asked, "Sir, when was the last time you spent time with your family?" Alexander became angry. "Don't question my life." But that night, he sat alone in his mansion. He looked around, and for the first time, the silence felt heavy. He remembered when he was young. He grew up poor. His father was a simple worker. His mother cooked food every night. They had little money, but they always ate together. They laughed. They shared stories. Alexander promised himself, "One day I will become rich. I will never struggle again." And he kept that promise. He became rich. Very rich. But he forgot something. He became wealthy and lost the simple happiness he once had. A few days later, Alexander traveled to another city for business. On the way, his car broke down. His driver said, "Sir, we need to wait." For the first time in years, Alexander had no schedule, no meeting, no phone calls, no control. He walked outside. He saw an old man sitting near a small shop. The old man was fixing old shoes. Alexander asked, "Do you do this every day?" The old man smiled. "Yes." Alexander asked, "Are you happy doing this?" The old man looked at him, then said, "I have little money, but I have peace. Some rich people have everything, but they are still searching for happiness." Those words stayed in Alexander's mind. The old man invited him for tea. Alexander looked surprised. A stranger was offering him kindness, something his money never bought. They sat together. The old man said, "My children visit me every week. We eat together. We laugh together. That is my wealth." Alexander looked down. He realized he had millions in the bank, but he couldn't remember the last time his family sat with him. When he returned home, he did something unusual. He turned off his phone. He walked into his daughter's room. His daughter was surprised. "Dad?" Alexander said. "I want to talk." She looked at him. After years, her father was finally there. She asked, "Why now?" Alexander stayed silent. Then he said, "Because I spent years buying things, but I forgot to spend time with people." His daughter's eyes filled with tears. She said, "I didn't need expensive gifts, Dad. I just wanted you." That sentence broke something inside him. The next morning, Alexander changed. He started having breakfast with his family. He visited old friends. He helped people quietly. Not for attention. Not for praise. His employees noticed. The man who once shouted started listening. The man who ignored people started caring. Years later, a young businessman asked Alexander, "What is your biggest achievement?" Alexander smiled. "My biggest achievement was not building companies. It was rebuilding myself. The young man asked. What is the biggest lesson money taught you? Alexander replied. Money can buy a house, but it cannot create a home. Money can buy a bed, but it cannot buy peaceful sleep. Money can buy a clock, but it cannot buy time back. When Alexander became old, he was not remembered as the richest man. He was remembered as a kind man. Because in the end, people don't remember your expensive cars. They remember how you made them feel. A poor man with love can be richer than a billionaire with loneliness. And sometimes, the person you ignore is the one who loves you the most. Red Heart. James was a successful businessman. He owned hotels. He had luxury cars. He had a beautiful mansion. People saw his life and said, he has everything. But they didn't know the truth. James had everything. Except someone who truly cared. Every morning, James looked out from his huge office window. Hundreds of people worked for him. But he felt alone. His phone was always ringing. But most calls were about money. Business. Deals. Problems. Nobody asked, James, are you okay? Years ago, James had a best friend named Daniel. They grew up together. When James had nothing, Daniel was there. When James had no money, Daniel shared his food. When James failed, Daniel encouraged him. But when James became rich, everything changed. He started thinking, I don't need anyone anymore. Daniel once visited him. He said, James, you changed. James laughed. People change when they become successful. Daniel replied, Success should change your life, not your heart. James didn't listen. He walked away. And Daniel left quietly. Years passed. James became richer. But his life became colder. His mansion was full. But his heart was empty. One day, James found an old box in storage. Inside was a small photo. Two young boys standing together. James and Daniel. Behind the photo was a note. Friends before success. James stared at the words. For the first time, he remembered the person he used to be. He searched for Daniel. He called old numbers. He asked people. Finally, he found him. Daniel was living a simple life, working at a small repair shop. James arrived in an expensive car. Daniel looked surprised. James? James smiled. Daniel, I came to say sorry. Daniel was quiet. After a moment he asked, Why now? James looked down. Because I have everything I ever wanted. But I lost the only person who cared about me before I had anything. Daniel smiled sadly. He said, I never left because you became rich. I left because you forgot kindness. James felt those words deeply. He asked, Can we be friends again? Daniel looked at him, then smiled. Friendship was never the thing you lost. You just stopped looking for it. From that day, James changed. He spent less time chasing money, more time with people. He helped others. He treated employees with respect. His company became different. People didn't work because they were afraid. They worked because they believed in him. Years later, someone asked James, What is your biggest success? Everyone expected him to mention his company, his wealth, his achievements. But James said, My biggest success was finding my heart again. He looked at Daniel. My friend taught me something. What? James smiled. The richest person is not the one who owns the most. It is the one who has people who truly love them. At the end of his life, James left behind money, buildings, companies. But the thing people remembered most was his kindness. Don't become so successful that you forget the people who loved you before success arrived. Red Heart, subscribe for more powerful emotional stories. I can make more. Because true love is not always about big surprises. Sometimes it is simply about staying when life becomes difficult. Red Heart. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., an old man named George made 2 cups of tea. One for himself. One for his wife, Mary. Even though Mary had been sitting quietly in the same chair for years, George still made her tea. Their neighbors often wondered, why does he still make 2 cups? Why does he talk to her like she answers? Nobody understood. Because they didn't know their story. George and Mary met when they were 22 years old. It was a rainy afternoon. Mary dropped her books on the street. George helped her pick them up. He smiled and said, Looks like the rain wanted me to meet you. Mary laughed, and that laugh stayed in his heart forever. They were young. They had dreams. They had almost nothing. Their first apartment was tiny. The furniture was old. The kitchen was small. But they were happy. One night, Mary asked, "George, do you think we will ever be rich?" George looked around their little home. Then he smiled. "We already are." Mary looked confused. "With what?" George held her hand. "With each other." Years passed. They worked hard. They raised 2 children. They faced struggles, bills, problems, losses, but they always faced them together. When George lost his job, Mary said, "We will get through this." When Mary became sick, George stayed awake every night. When life became heavy, they carried it together. Their children grew up. They moved away. They built their own lives. The house became quieter. But George and Mary still had each other. Then one day, Mary started forgetting things. Small things first. Where she put her keys. People's names. Old memories. The doctor said, "She has a condition that will slowly affect her memory." George sat silently. He understood. One day, she might forget him. That night, George looked at old wedding photos. He touched the picture. He whispered, "Please remember me." Months passed. Mary changed. Sometimes she looked at George like he was a stranger. Sometimes she asked, "Who are you?" Every time. It hurt him. But he smiled. One morning, Mary looked at him and asked, "Are you my husband?" George smiled softly. "Yes." She looked at the old ring on her finger. Then she asked, "How long have we been together?" George answered, "Almost 50 years." Mary became quiet. Then she smiled. "I don't remember all those years, but I feel safe with you." George's eyes filled with tears, because he realized, love is not only stored in memories. Sometimes love lives deeper, in the heart. Every day, George continued. 2 cups of tea, 2 chairs, 2 plates. Even when Mary forgot their past, he never forgot. One afternoon, George found an old notebook. Inside was something Mary wrote when they were young. It said, "If I ever forget things when I become old, please remind me of one thing." George turned the page. The next line said, "Remind me that I was loved." George cried, because he finally understood. He wasn't just caring for her. He was keeping a promise. Years later, George became old too. His hands became weak. His steps became slow. But every morning, he still made 2 cups of tea. A neighbor asked him, "George, why do you